Your father is dead." In a locked study, 3 envoys in tailored black lowered themselves to the marble. Heads bowed to the young man standing before them. "The throne is yours now, my king." He said nothing. He only looked at the ring in the eldest one's palm, the seal of the most powerful pack in the country. His birthright. "Come home," the man whispered. "Claim it." The young man folded their fingers back over the ring and sent them away. Hours earlier, the same hands, on his knees in a bright foyer, scrubbing spilled wine from the marble, while a woman in silk watched and smiled. "Some things are just born to clean up after their betters," she said, tipping her glass to spill again. He wiped it, without a word. The most powerful wolf in the country, on his knees, by choice. The question was never who he is. It's what happens to this house when they find out. 2 days after the men in black drove out through the gates, Wren was already on her knees in the courtyard gravel, gathering a spilled basket of apples back together, one bruised piece at a time. The old woman they belonged to kept trying to stop her. "Please, miss, please, you mustn't, your dress." "It's only a dress," Wren said, and reached for another apple. She had arrived 10 minutes earlier in a quiet gray car, the kind of money that doesn't bother announcing itself. Everything about her moved slow and unbothered, the calm of a woman who had never once had to prove she belonged in a room. The old woman's name was Hessa. 40 years she had carried trays through that palace on a hip that no longer forgave her, and in all that time not one high-born hand had ever reached down to help her with anything at all. So she didn't know what to do with the one reaching now. Up on the wide stone steps, the household staff had gone still. A future Luna did not kneel in the dirt for a serving woman. It simply wasn't done. "There," Wren said, setting the last apple in the basket and rising. "No harm done." "Bless you, miss." Hessa's voice shook. "Bless you, Wren. Just Wren." It was the man behind her who broke the spell. He came down the steps 2 at a time, took the heavy basket from Hessa's arms before her hip could buckle under it, and balanced it against his side like it weighed nothing. "I've got it," he told the old woman low. "Go and sit down. I'll bring the rest." He wore the plain dark uniform of a house servant, and he carried himself like the floor belonged to him. That was the only thing remarkable about him, if you were the kind of person who noticed such things. He turned to take Wren's cases next, and didn't quite meet her eyes. "This way, my lady. I'll see your things up." "You'll see some of my things up," Wren said. She slid the smaller bag off the stack and onto her own shoulder before he could stop her. "I'm not made of glass either." His hands paused on the cases. For a half second, something moved behind his face. Surprise. Quickly folded away. "As you like," he said. "What's your name?" "It doesn't matter, my lady. It does to me." She fell into step beside him, not behind, which a serving man was also not supposed to allow. "I'd rather not call you you for a whole week." A breath. "Dorian. Dorian." She tested it and smiled. "Thank you, Dorian." He had been called many things in that house. Thank you was not one of them. And the audience, watching, already knew the joke the whole palace was too blind to see. That the servant carrying her bags up the back stairs was a future alpha, heir to the most powerful pack in the country. A wolf who outranked every soul under that roof. He had buried himself here on purpose. To find exactly this, someone who would be kind to a nobody when there was nothing in it for them. They didn't make it to the top of the stairs. A voice cut down the corridor like a wire pulled tight. "Oh, Dorian." He stopped. His whole body changed. Not flinching, just going quiet. The way water goes flat before something heavy drops in. The woman who came toward them down the gallery was beautiful in the expensive, weaponized way of someone who has never been told no. Her name was Vesper, and she was the Alpha's daughter, and she ran this house like a small, cruel kingdom in her father's endless absence. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Vesper said, stopping a careful arm's length away, as if he might soil her. "Tell me, did they let you out, or did you crawl back on your own?" Dorian said nothing. "The men who came for you." Her mouth curled. Everyone saw it. Important people, black cars, hauling the help out the side door like a sack of something gone off. She tilted her head. What was it? Theft? Worse? Don't be shy. The whole house already knows you're some kind of criminal. She didn't wait for an answer. She lifted the tray of clean glasses from the side table beside her and let it fall. The crash went down the gallery and came back doubled. Shards spread in a bright fan across the marble at his feet. Clumsy, Vesper said to no one. Well, you're already down there in spirit. Clean it up. And the future alpha of the most powerful pack in the country got down on his knees on the cold stone. He began, without a word, to gather the broken glass into his bare hands. Wren watched it happen and went very, very still. She had spent her whole life being looked down on by exactly this, the ruling line. The cousins who never let her forget her father had lost, and she knew the particular taste of being made small by someone who'd done nothing to earn the height they spoke from. She set her bag down. She crouched beside Dorian and started picking up glass. The corridor stopped breathing. What? Vesper said slowly. Are you doing? Helping. Wren didn't look up. It's faster with two. He's staff. He's a person. Holding broken glass. A piece nicked Wren's finger. She didn't react. You could help too. There's plenty. For a moment Vesper had nothing. Her face did something ugly and uncertain. The look of a person who has swung at someone and felt their fist pass through empty air. You're going to wish, she said at last, very softly, you'd remembered which of us is which. Then she turned and walked away, heels snapping off the marble like small breaking bones. Dorian and Wren knelt in the wreckage she'd left. You shouldn't have, he said quietly. She'll make you pay for it. Let her. He looked at her then, really looked, for the first time, the careful guard slipping just enough to show something underneath that she couldn't name. Why? He asked. Why what? Why bother? With me? Wren considered the cut on her finger, then him. Because nobody else in this house will, she said. And I don't see why that's a reason. He didn't have an answer for that. He had been preparing answers for years, for the day someone tried to use him, flatter him, climb him. He had never once prepared for someone who simply didn't think he was beneath them. The days after that bent toward each other in small, undeniable ways. She found reasons to be where he was. He stopped finding reasons to be elsewhere. She'd come down to the kitchens in the gray hour before the house woke, when the only ones up were the staff and the ovens, and she'd sit on the worn table and talk to him while he worked, swinging her feet like a girl half her age. You don't talk like a servant, she told him one of those mornings, watching him fold dough with hands that were too sure. You argue like someone who's read too much. Servants read. Not like that. She narrowed her eyes, teasing and not. You corrected me on a point of pack law yesterday. Correctly. Where does a man who carries my bags learn the inheritance statutes of the high houses? Something flickered and was gone. You hear things, he said, in a house like this. She let it go, but she filed it away, the way curious people do. The wrongness of him, the way he fit nowhere and somehow above everything. It was old Hessa, of all people, who said the thing out loud. Wren had taken to sitting with her in the afternoons, learning her stories, easing the weight off that ruined hip. That boy, Hessa said one day, watching Dorian cross the far courtyard with a crate on his shoulder. You've noticed. Noticed what? The old woman's eyes were milky, but not blind to the things that mattered. He doesn't bow like a servant, she said. I've watched servants bow for 40 years, child. They bow because they have to. She nodded slowly toward him. That one bows like a man deciding to, every time, like he could choose not to, and is being kind. Wren looked, and once she'd seen it, she couldn't unsee it. She didn't have a word for what it meant. She only knew the feeling it left, because somewhere in those gray mornings and slow afternoons, without deciding to, Wren had started falling in love with a servant. And she had no idea, none of them did, that the quiet man she was falling for was the Alpha King, born to rule every wolf in that house and 100 houses beyond it. The story was earning itself, exactly the way Dorian had buried his name and his crown to make sure it would. Not given, earned, when he was no one. It couldn't last unwatched. Vesper found them on a Sunday, in the long gold light of the orangery, where Wren had coaxed Dorian into sitting for 10 stolen minutes, the two of them laughing at something, close enough that the closeness was the whole conversation. "Well," Vesper said from the doorway, "isn't this cozy?" They came apart. Dorian rose, all the easy warmth draining back behind the servant's mask. "I should stay," Vesper said sweetly. "Stay right there. I want to look at it." Her gaze crawled between them. "My cousin, daughter of the great man who gave away a throne, sitting in the dirt with the criminal help, giggling like a kitchen girl." She made a small, delighted sound. "Honestly, Wren, it's perfect. It's so exactly what you are." Wren stood, unhurried. "And what am I, Vesper?" "Lesser." The word came out like she'd been saving it. "Your father had the blood to rule, and he handed it back. Too soft, too proud, too busy playing at honor to take what was his. And look what it made. A branch of the family that kneels in gardens with the staff because it can't tell the difference anymore between itself and them." "My father stepped aside," Wren said, "because he didn't need a crown to know what he was worth." Her voice never rose. "You might want to ask yourself why that idea makes you so angry." It landed somewhere soft, and Vesper felt it. Her smile thinned to a blade. "You think you're better than me," she breathed. "No," Wren said. "I just don't think I'm better than him." She didn't look at Dorian. She didn't have to. That's the part you can't understand, isn't it? For the second time, Wren had swung nothing at her, and made her bleed. And Dorian, standing silent at the edge of it, watched Vesper's face curdle from contempt into something rawer, something that needed, badly, to make someone hurt to feel tall again. He had seen that exact face before, on other people, in other rooms. He knew what came after it. He just didn't yet know who she'd choose. She chose the one who couldn't fight back. It happened 3 days later, in the front hall, with half the household assembled. Because cruelty performed for an audience is the only kind Vesper enjoyed. An emerald bracelet had gone missing from her rooms, and Vesper had decided, out loud, exactly whose hands had taken it. 40 years of service, she said, circling old Hessa where the woman stood trembling on the marble. And it turns out the loyal old thing has been helping herself the whole time. My grandmother's bracelet. Gone. From a room only the cleaning staff touch. She stopped. "And who cleans my rooms, Hessa?" "I never—" The old voice broke apart. "Miss, I swear on my son, I never touched a thing of yours. I would never—" "Your son," Vesper smiled. "That's right. You're always going on about your dead son." She reached into the pocket of Hessa's apron, the old woman too frightened to stop her, and drew out the one thing the old woman carried everywhere, a small, cheap frame. A photograph behind cracked glass, worn pale from 40 years of being held. A young man, smiling, long dead. "This," Vesper said, "is what a thief keeps close." And she dropped it on the marble and put her heel through it. The frame splintered. The glass went to powder under her shoe, and she ground it, slow, watching the old woman's face come apart. Hessa made a sound that wasn't a word. She went down onto her knees after the ruined thing, gathering the splinters and the torn paper into her shaking hands, the way Wren had gathered apples on the first day. Except there was nothing to save. "You're finished here," Vesper told the top of her bowed gray head. "Out by morning. No reference. No wages owed to a thief." She stepped back from the wreck of it. 40 years, and you'll leave with exactly what you came in with." Wren was already moving, already at the old woman's side, already turning on Vesper with a fury that finally reached her voice. "She didn't take anything, and you know it. Careful, cousin." Vesper didn't even look at her. "This is house business, ruling line business. You're a guest." Her eyes flicked up, cold, "Unless you'd like to leave with her." And there it was, the thing that made the cruelty bite. In the Alpha's absence, Vesper had the authority. The word of the ruling line, however rotten, was still the word of the ruling line. Wren could rage. Wren could not overrule it. So she did the only thing left to her. She knelt on the cold floor beside a broken old woman, and held her while she shook, and glared up at her cousin with a promise in her eyes that she had no power yet to keep. And through all of it, the accusation, the heel, the powdered glass, the old woman folding to her knees over the last image of her child. Dorian stood at the edge of the hall and did not move. He watched every second of it. He watched the lie leave Vesper's mouth, smooth and practiced. He watched the frame break. He watched the woman who had been the only one to show him kindness when he first arrived, Hessa, who'd slipped him bread and asked for nothing, get destroyed in front of a crowd for a crime that had never happened. His hands stayed loose at his sides. His face stayed quiet. It cost him something to hold still that no one in that hall could have guessed. Because a single word from him, his real word, would have ended it, lifted the old woman up, and brought the whole rotten ceiling down on Vesper's head where she stood. He didn't say it. It wasn't time. But he was watching. He was always watching. And somewhere behind that servant's mask, the future Alpha King took the lie, and the heel, and the powdered glass, and the old woman's broken sound, and he folded it away, whole and exact, into the place where he kept the things that would come due. Vesper swept out of the hall, satisfied, certain she'd won, certain she'd reminded everyone which of them was which. She had no idea she had just done the one thing the man at the edge of the room would never let go. Later, when the hall had cleared, when the house had moved on like nothing had happened, Wren found Dorian in the back passage where Hessa had finally cried herself quiet. He was crouched in front of the old woman with the broken frame in his hands, fitting the torn halves of the photograph back together against his knee, smoothing them flat with a care that didn't match anything a servant was supposed to feel. "I can't fix the glass," he was telling Hessa, low. "But the picture, I can save. Tape, a new frame. You'll have his face back by tonight. I promise you that." The old woman caught his hand and pressed it to her wet cheek, and couldn't speak. Wren stood in the doorway and watched the man the whole house called nothing kneel in a back hall to mend a stranger's grief, like it was the most important thing in the world. And she understood, fully, in that moment, that she had given her heart to the right man, and that the house she was standing in had no idea what it was holding. He looked up and found her there. For a long moment, neither of them said anything at all. "You didn't stop her," Wren said finally. "Not an accusation, a question with something underneath it." "No," Dorian said. "I didn't. You could have. She didn't know why she was so sure of it. She only was. I don't know how I know that, but I do." He held her gaze, and for one breath the mask slipped all the way down, and what looked back at her was not a servant at all. "Some things," he said quietly, "you let happen, so you know exactly who everyone is, before they find out who you are." It went past her like a key turning in a lock she didn't know she had. She didn't understand it. Not yet. But she would. Behind them, Hessa held what was left of her son's face to her chest, and the great house settled into its evening like a thing that had gotten away with something. It had not. The servant they'd spent years grinding under their heels had just watched them show him the worst of what they were, and chosen, for a little while longer, to let them keep believing he was no one. The gap between what they thought and what was true had grown so wide you could have fallen into it and never hit the bottom. All that was left was the day it closed. By first gray light, old Hessa was already standing at the foot of the servant's stair, with everything she owned packed into a single cloth bag. 40 years of service. It fit in one bag. She had been told to be gone before the house guests arrived, and so she waited there in the cold, a woman of 70 with a ruined hip, standing because no one had yet told her she was allowed to leave through a door. Dorian came down and found her like that. He set the crate off his shoulder. "They haven't even let you sit," he said. "I'm all right, love." Her voice was paper thin. "Didn't want to make trouble on my way out." "You're not trouble." He lifted the bag gently out of her hands and held it himself, the way he'd held the apple basket the morning Wren arrived. "Wait, 5 minutes, let me—" "Don't." Hessa caught his wrist. Her clouded eyes found his face with that odd certainty she'd always had about him. "Whatever it is you keep behind your teeth, child, don't spend it on me. I'm an old woman. I'm not worth what it would cost you." He went still. She had no idea how near the bone she'd cut. "You don't know what I'm worth," he said quietly. "And you don't know what you are either." A door opened above them. Wren came down the stair fast, still pinning up her hair, and stopped when she saw the cloth bag in Dorian's hand, and the old woman beside it, dressed for the road. "No," Wren said. "Today? They're putting her out today? Before the guests come." Dorian's voice had gone flat and careful again. "There's a delegation arriving this morning. The hall's being opened." "What delegation?" "Highbridge." He said the name like it tasted of something. "Old pack. Powerful. Vesper's been writing to their heir for a month. She means to host them herself, while her father's away, and show them what a Luna she'd make." Wren looked at the bag, at Hessa, at the long marble hall already filling, somewhere above, with the sounds of a house dressing itself up to impress. "Then she's going to do it in front of them," she said slowly. "Isn't she? Throw away a woman who gave this house 40 years, as a performance." Dorian didn't answer. He didn't have to. The front hall, when they reached it, had been turned into a stage. Tall doors stood open to the morning. Staff lined the walls in their pressed dark uniforms, and in the center of it all stood Vesper, gowned and jeweled at not yet 8 in the morning, receiving the Highbridge party as they came up the steps. The Highbridge heir was a lean, watchful man with the unbothered stillness of someone raised at the very top of things, and the half-dozen wolves who came in at his back carried themselves the same way. Powerful people, the kind Vesper had spent her whole life wanting to be measured against, and found equal to. "You honor us," she was saying, all warmth and silk. "My father sends his regret. In his absence the house is mine, and you'll find it runs exactly as it should." And that was the cue she'd been waiting for. She turned, found Hessa standing small and gray at the edge of the hall with her one bag, and let her voice carry to every corner of the room. "Ah, before we go in." Vesper smiled at her guests. "You'll forgive a small piece of housekeeping. I find one should never let guests think a house is soft." She crossed to the old woman. "This one," she announced, "is a thief. 40 years under this roof, and she's been helping herself the whole time. My grandmother's emerald, gone from a room only she cleans." She let the silence stretch. "So she goes. This morning, with no reference and no wages, because that is what theft earns in a house I keep. I never touched it." Hessa's voice broke on the last word, in front of all of them. "I swear on my boy, miss, I never." "On your dead son?" "Yes." Vesper's mouth curved. "You do love to bring him up." Wren moved. She crossed the marble before she'd decided to, and put herself between the old woman and her cousin, and when she spoke, her voice was low and shaking and clear. "She didn't take it, and you know she didn't. There was never a bracelet missing. You made it up, to have something to break." The hall went quiet in a new way. Vesper looked at her cousin standing there in front of the most powerful pack in 3 territories, defending the help, and something behind her eyes lit up with a pleasure that was almost hunger. "Highbridge, you must meet my cousin," she said sweetly, not breaking from Wren's face. "Daughter of my father's brother. You'll have heard the story. The great man who had the blood to take a throne, and gave it back. Too proud, too soft." Her smile widened. "And this is what that softness breeds. A girl who'd rather kneel in the dirt with thieves and servants than stand with her own ruling line." "I'd rather kneel with the innocent," Wren said, "than stand with you." "Careful, cousin." Vesper's voice dropped, just for her, and went past spite into something genuinely cold. "You are a guest in this house, the same as them, and I am beginning to think you've forgotten what a guest is." Her eyes flicked to 2 of the house wolves along the wall. "Perhaps my cousin would like to wait outside, with the other things this house is finished with." The 2 men stepped off the wall toward Wren, and the servant moved. Dorian crossed the hall and put himself between Wren and the men coming for her. A house servant, in his pressed dark uniform, stepping into the path of the ruling line in front of half the pack nobility of the region. The hall stopped breathing. The 2 house wolves pulled up short, thrown, because the entire order of the world said a man like him did not do a thing like this. Vesper turned to him slowly, and her face was alight. "Oh," she breathed. "There he is. There's the criminal," she said, louder, for her guests, delighted now. "I told you we had one." The men in black cars came for him, hauled the help out the side door like spoiled meat, and here he is, putting his filthy hands between me and my own blood. She stepped closer, savoring it. "Lay one finger on those men, and I will have you thrown so far down, you'll forget you were ever even staff. Do you understand me? You are nothing in this house. You are less than the floor she—" "Stop!" The word did not come from Dorian. It came from the open doors. A man stood in them, sharp-suited, square-jawed, with the hard, easy bearing of someone who had walked through more dangerous rooms than this one, and never once hurried. Behind him came two others, in the same severe black, and the morning light went cold around them. Vesper rounded on the intruders. "This is a private. Be silent." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. His name was Kura, and he had crossed half the country because he had run out of patience waiting for a king to come home on his own. And he came through that doorway, already searching the hall for the one face he'd come for. He found it. He found his Alpha King standing in a servant's uniform, between two house thugs and a screaming girl, holding an old woman's cloth bag in one hand. And something in Kura's face came apart. "Get up," he said hoarsely, to the men, to the room, to all of them. "On your knees, every one of you, now." "Kura!" Dorian's voice cut across him, low and fast, a warning. "Don't." "No." For once, Kura did not obey him. His jaw worked. "No, my king. I have stood by long enough. I will not stand in a room and watch them make you carry their trays one more hour. I won't." "Kura." But it was already out. "Do you know who this is?" Kura turned on the hall, and his voice rang off the marble like a blade drawn clean. "Do you know whose floor you have had him scrubbing? This is the heir of the High Northern Pack, the son of the Alpha King who died 3 weeks ago. The throne of the most powerful bloodline in this country is his, empty and waiting, because he chose to stay here, among you." The Highbridge heir moved first. The watchful man who had let Vesper court him for a month, who outranked everyone in that hall but one. He took one look at Dorian's face, and the recognition hit him, and he went down onto one knee on the marble. His whole party followed. 6 of the most powerful wolves in 3 territories, kneeling. In the house Vesper had been so desperate to impress, to the servant she'd just called less than the floor. The sound of them going down was the only sound in the room, and the false story, the criminal, the side door, the spoiled meat, every cruel thing she had built around him for sport, collapsed in the time it took those knees to touch the stone. Dorian did not move. He didn't straighten into it. He didn't sneer. He didn't drink it down. He stood exactly as he had been standing, quiet, level, an old woman's bag still in his hand, and let the truth do every ounce of the work while he simply stood inside it. That was the thing none of them had ever understood about him. The power had never been in what he could do to them. It had been in everything he had chosen, day after day, not to. He set Hessa's bag down at last. Then he turned to the 2 house wolves who had been about to put their hands on Wren, and he spoke for the first time since the doors opened, and his voice was soft, and it stopped them cold where they stood. "You were going to touch her," he said. "Think very carefully about how close you came." They stepped back. Of course they did. Across the hall, the servant she had spent months falling for, the quiet man who carried her bags and mended a stranger's grief in a back passage, stood revealed as the Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the room and in 100 rooms beyond it. And Wren felt the floor of her whole understanding tilt sideways. She had loved him, before any of this. When he was no one, when there was nothing in it for her, nothing to gain, a servant the whole house called nothing. She had given her heart to him freely, and now the world was confirming what that heart had somehow always known. That should have been the sweetest moment of her life. It wasn't, because in the same breath the truth arrived, the rest of it arrived with it. He had known, he had always known, what he was, what one word from him could do. And he had stood at the edge of that hall 3 days ago and watched Vesper accuse an innocent old woman, watched the heel come down on a dead boy's photograph, watched Hessa fold to her knees over the wreck of it, and he had said nothing. He could have ended it with a sentence. He could have ended all of it. Every humiliation, every cruelty. The morning Wren herself had knelt to pick up broken glass. At any moment he chose. And he had chosen to let her watch, to let it all happen, so he could see who everyone was. The man she loved had been the most powerful person in the room the entire time, and he had used that power by withholding it, while people she cared about bled. She didn't know what she felt. She only knew it had two halves, and they didn't fit together, and both of them hurt. Dorian saw it land on her. He saw exactly what crossed her face, the love and the wound arriving in the same instant. And for the first time all morning, the king, who had not flinched at being called nothing, went pale. "Wren," he said. Just her name. He took a step toward her. "Wren, let me." And that was when Vesper, standing forgotten in the ruin of her own undoing, understood that she had lost everything. The match, the house, the story, the nobles on their knees to the man she'd degraded, the cousin she'd scorned, now bound to the most powerful wolf in the country, and lifted, in one stroke, miles above her. Everything gone. And a person like Vesper, with nothing left, does not break. She looks for someone to take down with her. Her head turned, slowly, away from Dorian, past him entirely, and fixed on Wren with a look that had gone all the way through hatred and out the cold other side. A look that was no longer spite at all, but a flat, certain promise. "You," Vesper said softly. "You think he saved you." She took a step toward her cousin, and what was in her hand, what she had been turning over and over against her own palm this whole time, finally caught the morning light. "Let me tell you what your servant prince doesn't know yet." And Wren, caught between the man she loved and the cousin who wanted her destroyed, the ground gone out from under everything she thought she'd understood one breath before, could only stand there, frozen, as Vesper's mouth opened to spend her last, worst card. The hall held its breath, and the silence closed over all of them like water over a stone. What Vesper had been turning over in her hand, all this time, was a phone. She held it up between herself and Wren, like a blade she'd been saving. "You want to know what your servant king is?" Her voice climbed, thin and fast. "I have every message that old thief ever sent from the house line, begging letters, money troubles, a son who died owing debts she never paid." She thumbed the screen, wild-eyed. "I'll put it in front of all of them. I'll show Highbridge exactly what kind of filth this house lets sleep under its roof. And your precious, give it to me." Dorian had not raised his voice. He'd crossed the hall while she was still talking, and now he simply held out his open hand, palm up, unhurried, the way a man asks for something already his. Vesper's mouth kept moving. Nothing came out of it, because every wolf of rank in that room was on one knee behind her, and the math of the moment had finally reached her body even where her mind refused it. That the man she was threatening could, with a word, unmake her entirely. "It won't work," Dorian told her, quiet enough that only the front of the hall heard it. "You've been threatening people with the truth your whole life, and you never once noticed. It only works on people who have something to hide." He took the phone out of her slackening fingers. "She has nothing to hide. She never did. That was always the difference between her and you." He set the phone face down on the side table, and just like that, her last card was gone. Not slapped away, not seized in fury, simply taken, because she'd never actually had power, only the room's agreement to pretend she did. And that agreement had ended the second 6 nobles touched their knees to the floor. Vesper stood in the center of everything she'd built, and felt it become nothing around her. Wren watched her cousin's face come apart, and felt no triumph in it. She felt, of all things, a little sick, because she knew that specific unraveling, the horror of a person discovering the ground was never where they'd been standing, and she was discovering her own version of it in the same breath. She turned away from Vesper. She looked at Dorian, and the thing in her chest that had split open the moment Kura named him was still split, still bleeding, and it would not be closed by nobles kneeling, or by a phone going dark on a table. "I need to not be in this room," she said. "To no one. To him. I need air." She walked out through the open doors, past the kneeling delegation, past her ruined cousin, into the cold of the morning courtyard, and she did not look back to see if he followed. He followed. She made it as far as the low stone wall at the edge of the garden, before she heard his step on the gravel, and turned on him, and now the tears were there, furious and unwilling. "3 days ago," she said, "in the front hall, Hessa, Wren, you stood there." Her voice shook, the way a held thing shakes. "You stood at the edge of that room, and you watched Vesper call that old woman a thief in front of everyone. You watched her put her heel through the last picture of a dead boy. You watched Hessa go down on her knees on the marble, and you had this the whole time." She flung a hand back at the house, at the kneeling nobles, at the impossible truth of him. One word. You could have stopped it with one word, and you chose to let it happen. It was the wound the whole phase had been moving toward, and now it was out, and it sat between them in the cold air. Dorian didn't defend himself. That was the first thing, the thing she hadn't expected. He didn't reach for a justification or a softening. He stood there and took it, the way he'd taken everything. Except this time, she could see exactly what it cost. Because this time, it was her. "You're right," he said. She'd been braced for an argument. She had no defense ready for agreement. "I told myself it wasn't time," he went on, low. "I told myself if I moved too soon, the wrong people would know what I was before I understood what they were. That a king who reveals himself to stop one cruelty loses the chance to stop 100. His jaw worked. "Those things are even true, and none of them were worth what it cost her. Or what it cost you to watch me let it happen. Then why?" "Because I have spent my whole life," he said, "being wanted for the wrong reason." It stopped her. "Do you understand what it is?" he said. "To be born what I am? From the day I could walk, every kindness shown to me came with a price tag I could see, and the person offering it could not. Every smile was an investment. Every friend was positioning. My own name walked into a room a full minute before I did, and decided everything about how people would treat me." He looked at her, and the servant's mask was entirely gone now, and what stood in the cold was just a man who had been profoundly alone for a very long time. "So I took the name off. I put on the uniform. I came to the one place in the country where I would be the lowest thing in the building, where no one had a single reason to be kind to me. And I waited to see who would be kind anyway." The pieces turned and locked, and Wren heard the key go all the way home. "The mistreated servant who was secretly the Alpha King," she said slowly, the shape of the whole thing arriving at once. "That wasn't something that happened to you. You did it, on purpose. I did it on purpose. To find," she stopped. "To find the one person," he said, "who would value me when I was no one, when there was nothing in it for them. When I was less than the floor." Something raw moved under his voice. "I found her on the first morning, on her knees in the gravel, picking up an old woman's apples because it was faster with two. The tears spilled over, and she let them. 'That's not fair,' she said. 'You don't get to say something like that to me right now. I'm furious with you. I know.' A breath. 'Be furious. You're allowed to love someone and be furious at them in the same minute. I'd know.' The ghost of something almost like a smile. 'I've been both, about myself, for years.' She laughed, wet and unwilling and real, and hated that he'd pulled it out of her. 'Hessa,' she said, when it passed. 'Whatever this fixes, it doesn't fix Hessa.' She still stood there. She was still called a thief in front of the whole house. She still— "No," he agreed. "It doesn't fix it. Nothing fixes the having happened of a thing." He held her eyes. "But watch what I do with it. Then decide what I am." He paused. "Not what Kura announced. Not what they're kneeling to. What I actually do, now, in front of you. Decide on that." And the wound didn't close. Not all the way. Wounds like that don't, in a single morning in a cold garden. But something in her chose to stop bleeding long enough to see what he meant. "All right," she said. "Show me." What he did in front of all of them. He walked back into the hall, where the delegation still knelt, and the household still stood frozen against the walls, and he did not tell anyone to rise. He crossed instead to the edge of the room, where old Hesse stood small and bewildered with her one cloth bag, having watched her whole world turn inside out, and not yet daring to believe any of it touched her. He took her hand. "Hesse," he said, and he said it loud, on purpose, so it carried to every kneeling noble and every wide-eyed servant in the room. 40 years ago, you started carrying trays through this house. This morning, you were called a thief, in front of all these people, by someone who has never in her life been told the word no. I stood there and let it happen, and that is my shame to carry, not yours." The old woman's mouth trembled. "Child, you don't have to. I'm not finished." Gentle, immovable. There was no stolen bracelet. There was never anything missing, but the decency of the person who accused you. Every soul in this room is going to hear me say it once, clearly, so it can never be unsaid. He raised his head and let his voice fill the hall. "This woman is no thief. This woman is the only person who showed me kindness on the day I arrived here with nothing. Bread she couldn't spare, and not one question about what I could do for her in return." His hand tightened around her frail one. "When I take my father's throne, she comes with me. A place in my household for the rest of her life, and her wages for all 40 years paid in full, by this house, before I leave it." Hesse made the sound she'd made when the frame broke, except it was the opposite of that sound now, the same shape turned all the way over. She pressed his hand to her wet face and could not speak. And across the hall, Wren watched the most powerful wolf in the country actually kneel, down onto the cold marble in his servant's uniform, to be at eye level with a weeping old woman the house had thrown away. And she felt the split thing in her chest, finally begin to knit. Not because he was a king, because of what he did with being one. That was the moment she stopped grieving the secret and started seeing the man the secret had been protecting. The cascade moved outward from there, and it moved fast. The Highbridge heir rose without being told, crossed the hall, and inclined his head to Dorian, not the deep kneel of the first shock, but the level nod of one power acknowledging a greater one. "My pack stands with the northern throne," he said. "Whatever you need of us in the claiming of it." His gaze cut sideways, cold, to Vesper. "And you should know, there was talk of an alliance with this house, a joining." His mouth thinned. "There won't be. I came to see what kind of Luna this one would make." He looked at her like something scraped off a shoe. "I have my answer." It landed on Vesper like a second collapse, stacked on the first. The marriage she'd schemed for, the one she'd thrown Hesse away to perform for, was gone, killed by the very cruelty she'd staged to impress it. Every move she'd made had become the instrument of her own undoing, and the household, the stewards, the senior staff, the cousins who'd laughed at the servant with her, began, one by one, to understand the new shape of the world. They had spent months, some of them years, abusing the man who would, within the week, hold a throne that could erase their houses with a sentence. Every cruelty they'd handed him, he'd taken with that quiet, watchful patience, and now they understood what the patience had been. He hadn't been weak, he'd been keeping count. One of the stewards, a heavy man who had more than once knocked a tray from Dorian's hands for sport, came forward and lowered himself, babbling to the floor. "My king, had I known, I never would have. Please, you must understand, we didn't." "That's the part you should sit with," Dorian said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The man froze. "You never would have had you known." Dorian looked down at him, and there was no cruelty in it, which somehow made it worse. "Which means it was never about right or wrong for you, only about what I could do back. You were perfectly content to grind a man into the floor, right up until you learned the floor could grind back." He let that sit. "I'm not going to punish you for the trays. I'm going to do something you'll find much harder to live with. I'm going to remember exactly who you were when you thought I was no one. And so will everyone watching you scramble now." The steward had no answer. There wasn't one, and that was the engine of the whole reckoning, laid bare. Dorian never lifted a hand, never threw a man down, never repaid a single cruelty in kind. He just stopped hiding and let every person in that house stand fully illuminated in the light of what they'd chosen to do to someone they believed could never make them pay. The shame did all the work cruelty would have done and left his hands clean. Through it all, Wren stood a little apart, near the doors, and watched. She was not kneeling. She had never knelt to him, not once, not when he was a servant, and not now that he was a king. And as the realization moved through the hall, more than one wolf glanced at her standing there, the only person in the room who'd treated this man exactly the same before and after she knew. She'd loved him as nothing. The crown changed what everyone else saw. It changed nothing she felt. And Dorian, in the middle of his own unveiling, kept finding her with his eyes across the hall, the one fixed point in a room that had completely rearranged itself around him, as if to say, "You're the reason. You were always the reason." Vesper was the last to break. She'd stood through all of it, rigid, watching her every weapon turn to water in her hands. The threat, the marriage, the household, the cousin she'd called lesser, now standing as the still point the Alpha King's gaze kept returning to. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost all its silk. "So that's it. Brittle. Cracking. You'll take your throne, and you'll keep me here in my own house like a cautionary tale. The girl who didn't know. A terrible laugh. You want me to grovel? Fine. Is that what buys mercy? Watch. I don't want you to grovel," Dorian said. And this was the only moment all morning his voice carried any heat at all. And it was not for the trays, not for himself. "You want to kneel for something?" He looked at her. "It's not me you wronged that I can't forgive. I let you do what you did to me. I chose that. But that old woman didn't choose anything. You broke a dead child's photograph under your heel to feel tall for an afternoon." His voice dropped and went very cold. "That is what you'll answer for. Not because you didn't know what I was, because of what you were willing to do to someone you were certain was beneath you. That's the only test that ever mattered in this house." She passed it the first morning. He didn't look at Wren. He didn't have to. You failed it every single day. Vesper had nothing. For the first time in her life, the most important person in the room had looked straight through her and found her small. She sank down onto the marble. Not in a bid for mercy now, but because her legs had simply stopped agreeing to hold up the weight of what she'd become, and the house she'd ruled in her father's absence finished, at last, the long business of falling down around her. Dorian turned from her. He crossed the hall one more time, past the nobles, past the steward, past the wreckage of the morning, to where Wren stood by the doors, still not kneeling, still watching him with that fury and that love braided together into something he would spend the rest of his life trying to deserve. "You said decide on what I do," she said quietly, as he reached her. "Not on the crown." And she looked past him, at Hessa, cradled now in the care of two suddenly attentive maids, at the kneeling nobles, at the ruin of her cousin on the floor, and last, at him. "I'm still angry," she said. "I know, and I still love you." Her chin lifted. "I loved you when you were carrying my bags. I'm not going to stop now just because the whole world finally caught up to what I already knew." Her eyes shone. "But you're going to spend a long time earning back the morning you let me watch that and said nothing. I know that too." Something eased in him, profound and quiet. "I'm counting on the time." Behind them, the great house knelt and trembled and rearranged itself around its true shape. And the servant they had all looked through stood in the center of it, uncrowned still, a borrowed uniform on his back, and let them see, at last, exactly who had been carrying their trays. The mask was off. All that was left was the throne, and the question of what a man like that does with a house that has just learned, far too late, precisely what it tried to grind beneath its heel. The uniform went first. He stripped the plain dark servant's coat from his shoulders right there in the hall, in front of all of them, and held it out to the heavy steward who had once knocked a tray from his hands for sport. "Have it cleaned and kept," Dorian said. "Someone in this house may need to wear it honestly one day." A pause. "It would be a waste to throw away a thing that taught me so much." The steward took it in both hands like it might burn him. Kura came to his side with something folded over one arm. Not a crown, nothing so loud as that. A coat of deep northern gray, the colors of a pack that had been waiting 3 weeks for its king to come home. "It's past time," Kura said, low. "Wear your own colors." And the household watched the man they had spent a year looking through put on the gray of the high northern throne and become, in front of their eyes, the thing he had always been underneath the borrowed black. Nothing about him changed. That was what undid them. The same quiet, the same level stillness, the same man who'd carried the apple basket and mended a broken frame in a back passage. He had not transformed into someone powerful. He had simply stopped hiding that he always was. They came for him within the hour. His pack, in force. Not soldiers exactly, but wolves who carried the same unhurried certainty Kura did, filling the courtyard where Wren had knelt for an old woman's apples on the first morning of all this. They did not look at the great house with awe. They looked at it the way you look at a place that has wronged something of yours, and the household, who had spent their lives certain of their own importance, finally understood how small their kingdom had always been. It was into this, into a courtyard full of his son's true pack, into a house turned entirely on its head, that the Alpha came home. Theron arrived in a single car through the front gates, alone, summoned by a dozen panicked messages he had read somewhere on the road and not believed. He was a big man, gone slightly gray at the temple, with the squared jaw and steady weight of someone built to hold a room. And for the first few steps out of the car, he held it, scanning the courtyard for the emergency he'd been called home to manage. Then he saw his own house staff kneeling, not to him. "What is this?" Theron said. No one answered him fast enough. He came up the steps, into the hall, and the story assembled itself in front of him, in pieces he couldn't yet fit together. The northern gray, the kneeling nobles of a pack he recognized, his daughter standing rigid and gray-faced against the far wall, and at the center of all of it, a calm young man he had never once been introduced to. "You," Theron said to him, "I know your colors. I knew your father." Something moved over his face. Calculation. Then a cold dawning. He passed. 3 weeks ago. The whole North's been quiet with it. His eyes went hard. "What is the heir to the northern throne doing? Standing in the middle of my hall, in the colors of the dead." "Standing," Dorian said. "It's mostly what I've done here. A beat. Standing, and carrying things, and cleaning what your daughter spilled." The hall held its breath. Theron looked at him, uncomprehending. "Explain that." "I came here a year ago," Dorian said, "with no name and no colors, and I took work in your house as a servant. By choice. No one here knew what I was. Your household put me to the floor, and I let them, because I wanted to see something that you only see from down there." He paused. "Who a house is, when it thinks no one important is watching. You lived as staff." Theron said it like the words wouldn't hold weight. "In my house. While you were away," Dorian finished. "Quiet. Not cruel. Yes." And there it was. Theron turned slowly, taking in his own hall, the kneeling nobles, the gray-faced daughter, the servants who would not meet his eyes, and the full shape of it began, at last, to reach him. "My daughter," he said. "What did my daughter do?" It was old Hessa who answered him. She came forward from the edge of the room where the maids had been tending her, small and bent, her one cloth bag still at her feet. And she did not accuse, she simply told it, in the flat, tired voice of someone who has stopped expecting to be believed. "She called me a thief, my lord. 40 years I served your family. She said I stole a bracelet that was never gone, in front of the whole house, to make a show of it for her guests." Hessa's chin trembled. "And she took the picture of my boy out of my apron, and she put her heel through it on your floor, and she ground it to powder while I watched. Then she put me out, this morning, with no wages and no name." Theron did not move for a long moment. Then he crossed the hall, past the nobles, past his own daughter, and he crouched down, a big man folding low, and he put 2 fingers against the marble where Hessa was pointing. There was a scar in the stone, a small, pale scratch where a heel had ground glass into the floor and left its mark. The only physical wound the whole crime had left in the world. Theron knelt there and looked at it for a long time, and something in the set of his shoulders came down, slowly, like a load finally being acknowledged after being carried a long way unnamed. "I gave you everything," he said. He wasn't speaking to Hessa. He was looking across the hall now, at Vesper, and his voice was very quiet. Every door open, every want answered. "I told myself I was providing, that a man builds his children a fortress, and they grow safe inside it." His jaw worked. "And I came home to find you'd used the fortress to crush an old woman over a picture of her dead son, to feel tall." "Father," Vesper's voice cracked, "you weren't here. You were never here. You don't know what it's like to—" "No." Theron's voice didn't rise, and somehow that was worse than if it had. "I wasn't here. That's the part I'll carry. I left you a house and no one to show you what it was for." He rose to his feet and faced her fully. "But I was absent. You were cruel. Those are not the same failure, and I will not let you hide the second one inside the first." Vesper had no answer. She had run out of them somewhere back in the front hall, when the nobles touched their knees to the floor, and she had been hunting for one ever since, and finding only the bottom of herself. "Here's what happens now," Theron said, and his voice was the voice of an alpha at last. The thing his house hadn't heard in far too long. "You ran this house in my absence, and you ran it like a small, cruel kingdom. That ends today. You will hold no authority here. Not over the staff, not over the doors, not over so much as the setting of a table. You'll remain under this roof, because I won't throw a daughter into the dark the way you threw an old woman. But you will live in the house you poisoned, with no power in it at all." He let that land. "And every day you will watch the man you called less than the floor be bowed to by everyone who enters. And you will watch your cousin, the one you named lesser, stand higher than you will ever stand again. That is not a punishment I'm inventing to be cruel. It's simply the truth you built, and now you have to live inside it." "And Hessa," Dorian said. Theron turned to him. "The wages," Dorian said. 40 years, paid in full, by this house, today, not as charity, as a debt owed and overdue. And the slander said in front of a room gets unsaid in front of the same room, by the one who said it." He looked at Vesper, and for the only time, there was steel in it. "You'll tell every soul who heard you call her a thief that she was no such thing, out loud, before you do anything else." It was the precise shape of the crime, turned back. She had used a crowd to brand an innocent. Now the crowd would hear the brand burned off. Vesper's mouth opened. For one heartbeat the old defiance flickered, the instinct to refuse, to wound, to claw for height. Then she looked at her father's face, and at the kneeling pack, and at the impossible gray-clad truth of the man in the center of the room, and the defiance went out of her like a candle pinched between 2 fingers. "She didn't take it," Vesper said. Barely audible. "Louder," Theron said. "She didn't take anything." Vesper's voice broke open in front of all of them. "There was no bracelet. I made it up. Hessa is no thief. There was never anything missing." Tears stood in her eyes, and for the first time, they looked like they might be for someone other than herself. "I'm sorry." Whether the last part was true, no one could say. But it was said, and the old woman who had carried trays through that house for 40 years finally heard, in front of everyone who'd watched her shamed, the truth, spoken back into the room where the lie had lived. Hessa closed her eyes. That was all. She just closed her eyes and let it be true. The house was quiet after that. The long, emptied quiet of a place that has finally stopped pretending to be something it wasn't. Dorian found Wren in the orangery, in the long gold light where Vesper had once caught them sitting too close. She was waiting for him. "You did all of that," she said, "and never once raised your voice past quiet." Loud was never going to fix anything. He stopped a careful pace from her, closer than a servant would have dared, not as close as he wanted. Quiet did. The truth did. It always does, if you can stand to wait for it. You waited a year. I waited a year. He looked at her. And on the first morning of it, I found the thing I came for. And then I spent the rest of the year too much of a coward to risk losing it by telling you what I was." She was quiet a moment. "I'm still angry about Hessa," she said. "I know. You should be." A breath. "Are you still angry enough to send me away?" "No." The word came out before she could dress it up. "No. I tried. This morning in the garden, I tried to stay angry enough to walk. I couldn't find the door." Her eyes shone. "Because you're the same man. That's the unfair part. You put on the gray, and the whole world fell on its knees. And you're exactly the same man who told me to go sit down on the first day, because I'd had a long drive." "I'd like to be that man for you," Dorian said, "for the rest of my life." The orangery went very still. "I'm not asking you because of any of this," he said. "Not the throne, not the pack, not the kneeling. You loved me before there was a single thing in it for you. You were kind to me when I was the lowest thing in the building, and you had every reason in the world not to be." His voice dropped, rough at the edges. "Be my Luna, Wren. Not because I'm a king, because you're the one person alive who'd have stood beside me even if I never had been." She didn't answer right away. She reached up, instead, and touched the northern gray at his collar, the colors he'd hidden for a year, like she was making sure they were real. "On one condition," she said. "Anything. You spend the rest of that life," she said, "remembering you let me watch them break an old woman and said nothing. Not as a wound I'll hit you with, as a thing you carry, so you never let it happen again. To anyone, now that you've decided to stop hiding." Her chin lifted. "A king who waited too long once, who learned not to." "That," Dorian said quietly, "I can promise you." Then yes. And she didn't know it in that moment, standing in the gold light. None of them ever fully did. But the world would tell this story for years afterward. How the servant she loved was secretly the Alpha King. How she hadn't known. How she had loved him anyway, before the crown, before the truth, when he was no one at all. And how that, in the end, was the only reason the love was worth anything. He took his father's throne 11 days later. Not in that house, but at the high northern seat. A hall older and greater than anything in Theron's gated kingdom, where the pack that had waited 3 weeks finally watched their king come home and sit where his father had sat. And the people who came to witness it told their own quiet story, just by being there. Theron came. The Alpha who had been absent his whole story, stood in the gallery and watched the young man his house had degraded take a throne that outranked his own, and he did not look away from it, which was its own kind of penance. And beside Theron stood his brother. Lucian arrived the morning of it, Wren's father, a lean, disciplined man with his daughter's steady eyes, and a stillness that had clearly been earned rather than inherited. And the two brothers stood together in the gallery for the first time in years, the one who had taken the throne, and the one who had given it away. "You stepped aside," Theron said to him, low, watching the hall fill. "Years ago, you had the blood to rule, and you handed it to me and walked off to build your own life. I never understood it. I thought you were soft." "I know what you thought," Lucian said. "My children grew cruel in a house full of power," Theron said. "And yours," he stopped. His voice was not steady. "Yours grew into the woman that man is about to raise above every wolf in 3 territories. You gave up a throne and it came back to your line anyway, through her, through how you raised her." He shook his head slowly. "I kept mine, and look what it made." Lucian was quiet a long moment. "I didn't give it up to get anything back," he said at last. "That's the only reason it came back." A faint, sad smile. "Power doesn't return to the hands that grab for it, brother. It has a way of circling round to the ones who could have held it and chose to be good instead." He looked at his daughter, down in the great hall, in the deep colors of a Luna. "I just wanted her to be worth something with nothing in her hands. The rest was never mine to plan. And down in the hall it happened. The servant no one in that other house had thought worth a kind word took his father's throne, in front of his whole pack and the nobles of 3 territories and the family that had tried to grind him into a marble floor. And then he reached out his hand. And Wren, the humble daughter of the brother who walked away from power, the woman who'd knelt in gravel for an old woman's apples, who had loved a penniless servant when there was nothing in it for her, climbed the dais and took her place beside him as his Luna, raised, in a single moment, miles above the cousin who had called her lesser, not because she'd schemed for it, because she'd never once tried to. Old Hessa watched it from a place of honor near the front, the mended photograph of her son whole again in a new frame in her lap, in a household where she would now grow old, warm, and unafraid. The man who had carried her apple basket on the first morning had kept every promise he made her in a back passage, and a few she hadn't known to ask for. And the closing truth of the whole thing settled over the hall like light through old glass. A man had been born to the highest power in the land, and had buried it, and put on a servant's coat, and gone looking for the one person who would treat the lowest thing in the building like a person. He'd found her, and the house that looked through him learned, far too late, that the quiet ones absorbing the cruelty aren't always weak. Sometimes they're just deciding who you are, because in the end, the rank you're born into is only the start of the sentence. What you do when you think no one important is watching. That's the part that tells the world what you actually are. The servant sat his father's throne. The Luna who saw him when he was no one sat beside him. And the wheel, having gone all the way around, came quietly to rest exactly where it belonged. End of story. CTA, spoken, invoice outro. If you've ever been the quiet one in the room, the one they looked through, the one they were sure didn't matter, then you already know the secret this whole story turns on. They're not watching you, so watch them. Be kind when there's nothing in it for you. Stay steady when they're certain you're beneath them. And let the truth take its time, because it always arrives. If this one stayed with you, there's another soul on this channel who had to fall further than Dorian ever did before the world finally saw what they were truly worth. Go and find the worthless mate, and watch them rise. Stay, if you'll stay a while longer. There's always another story waiting in the dark.